From the land of the free and the home of the Chiefs, this is the Locked On Chiefs podcast.
Welcome back to Locked On Chiefs. We are kicking off a brand new week, the first week of our off season, and it's going to get started with a bang. All this week, we're going to be featuring content that is about the AFC West, as all the teams in the AFC West start to come after the Kansas City Chiefs to try and get even for what they saw the Chiefs just do in Super Bowl 54. It's an interesting concept, and so what we've done is set up a series of shows with all of the AFC West hosts. You'll hear the Raiders, Chargers, and Broncos hosts as well dig a little deep about how every season went, where everybody is, and what the AFC looks like going forward. This gives Chris and I a little bit of time to kind of recharge and not just keep forging through after the Super Bowl. It's been a long season, and we have done quite a bit around the Super Bowl and its fallout. There will still be more coming about where the Chiefs are. I'm going to give you a little bit every day this week of where I think certain position groups are at. Chris is going to take a little bit of a vacation, and we're going to have a lot of conversation that we record all in one chunk and give you guys all week long. When we return next week, we'll start it off with a bang with a friend of ours that I think you guys are going to be happy to hear from again. But today, we start with a one-on-one conversation between Cody Rourke, the Broncos, the host of Locked On Broncos, and I, talking about just where the Chiefs go from here. We review the season and get into what is the AFC West going to be doing to try to keep up with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs to try and make 2020 a little bit more competitive because of the way that it all fell out. Now, as the week goes on, we're going to hear a lot of conversation between the other hosts about how they're going to try to jockey for position and try to catch up. There's some theories out there. Do the other teams in the AFC West try to bolster their offenses to try and score more points? Or do they focus on trying to slow something down on the Chiefs' end and really concentrate in this draft on their defenses? That is a question to be sorted out. We're going to dig into all the details all week long. That said, I'm very excited about the fact that they all have to play catch-up. And this is a team in the Kansas City Chiefs that I think you're going to hear a lot of concern out of everybody else's voices. But starting today, we're going to get over with Cody and go over so that I can run down for him what happened with the Chiefs in detail, and then all the rest of the week, listen closely, and we'll get some inside intel on what's going on with the other three teams in this division. Great stuff that's going to pay off during the offseason. We'll be back with offseason reviews, position reviews, free agency in its full glory when we get back.
Hey everybody, welcome into a very special crossover series that we're beginning here over the Locked On NFL Network this week. It is the ultimate AFC West Division crossover. I'm Cody Rourke, host of Locked On Broncos. I'm joined today by Ryan Tracy, host of Locked On Chiefs, and we're going to hear from Daniel Wade of Locked On Chargers in just a moment, and your boy Q of Locked On Raiders. We're going to be breaking down the 2019 season in a nutshell, what it meant for each team. We're going to analyze each team every single day, plus Valentine's Day. Who do we love on our teams, respectively? We talk about that and much more. But today's episode, we are focused on the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions, and obviously a big season for them. Patrick Mahomes and just that defense, what they're able to do, transforming, going from last year to this year, losing in the AFC Championship game against Tom Brady, and then coming back and making it through the Super Bowl and winning the big game. And I'm joined by Ryan Tracy, host of the Locked On Chiefs podcast. Ryan, we got a lot to talk about today, man. Obviously, a division crossover. Love these things, and it gets a little bit of interaction from every fan base included.
Yeah, it's going to be great. And folks, doesn't matter whether you're a Locked On Broncos fan or a Locked On Chiefs fan, you're going to hear this show everywhere, and we're going to go through everything because, quite frankly, for the Chiefs fan base, we're not paying attention to much in the division right now because it's been a little busy.
Well, and they're kind of riding the high, too. The champagne bottles are popping. They just had the parade, a lot of craziness, guys falling out of trees. But Kansas City, obviously, for the first time in 50 years, probably a really exciting feature for, obviously, Kansas City. I'm going to ask you a few questions here, Ryan, in terms of the Chiefs 2019 season. What was a quick overview of how the season had played out with Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, some ups and some downs, obviously, through 2019 that led them to the glory of Super Bowl 54?
Honestly, the big thing was adaptation. That was what they had to do the whole time. I mean, at one point there was, I think, 2 starting offensive linemen in the lineup on a given game. Obviously Mahomes against your team in Denver, a game that I was at, has that kneecap dislocation that is season ending in most cases. The fact that he had enough laxity in his body to recover from that's pretty miraculous, to tell you the truth. And the fact that the team, when he was out, was able to overcome not having QB1. Matt Morsepton did a lot of good things there. It didn't matter whether it was the new defense that was put in fresh, that everybody had to learn their roles, learn their parts, or the fact that we had 8 new starters on defense. Just so much change. It was all about adaptation. And there were times, quite frankly, during the season where you weren't sure if it was going to come all the way together.
Well, there's some things that worked out well. Obviously, their offense and their productivity. Eric Bieniemy, he was able to do alongside Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, just the wide variety of weapons from Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Damian Williams, and even going back to even McCole Hardman's rise as a rookie this year. I mean, it almost seems like, okay, if one piece fell down, they were able to plug in. You mentioned Matt Moore. I think what didn't go well for the Chiefs this year is obviously that little bit of a stretch. They did lose 4 games and 3 of those were at home, but they were able to respond very quickly early on from some of that adversity. And then midway through the season, they just started hitting their stride offensively. I mean, they blew Oakland out of the water. They beat Denver pretty handily 20-3 in that blizzard game at Arrowhead Stadium. This was a team that was just ready to roll, and they could strike it any minute. I mean, you go back to the playoff game against the Houston Texans, they were down 24-0 quickly. I mean, they got smacked in the mouth, and for the whole entire NFL world, everybody was watching. And everybody was saying, this could be it where we see the Chiefs just collapse, and all of a sudden, bam, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, Bill O'Brien decides to go for a fake punt. It's the snowball effect. Kansas City, they thrive off momentum, and they were able to capitalize big time. And obviously being able to outscore them in that facet the way that they did is impressive. I mean, that's where the theme is. And I think from a Broncos perspective, Ryan, the Broncos are looking at how do they improve more on the offensive side of the ball to be able to compete with Kansas City. It's going to be tough. But in terms of that, how do you think the Chiefs are going to be set up for 2020? Because there's some big questions looming ahead with Patrick Mahomes, a potential contract extension, and along the lines too, some other guys like Chris Jones and them being able to hit the free agency market. How do you see things playing out for them going into the 2020 season so far?
It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a lot of ups and downs. And I know you got yourself in a little turmoil with Chiefs fans there, and that's okay. I mean, everybody's got their perspective. And I'm sure whether it's you covering the Broncos or it's a Raiders fan or somebody in LA who found out what the Chargers are, I don't know how many of those there are, but I feel bad for the Chargers. I mean, I feel like they're a team that has so much talent and they just don't have the support. I hope that changes for them, just as a fan of football. But it all leads back to the question of how are you going to rebuild this team? There's a lot of free agents the Chiefs have to deal with, some in some key positions. And there's that looming thing of both the CBA and Mahomes contract because of what it may do to limit what you can do. This isn't a team that has to go get free agents. They have in the past, and they've filled some big holes. Obviously, with Frank Clark and Tyrann Mathieu, they paid off. And that really is what that defense gelled around and allowed itself to grow. But there's a couple other pieces that need to be found. You need a CB1 still, in my opinion, although there's a lot of Chiefs fans that will argue with me about that. And hey, that's fair too. Y'all get your own opinions. But I think that the team feels that they need to do that. There's a linebacker issue that I think Reggie Ragland's up as a free agent. I don't know that they're going to try to bring him back. He is one of my favorite players. I loved him coming out of college, and I do feel like he finally got his career rejuvenated this season. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to move on with this team, or what are they going to do? Just look to the draft. There's not a ton of draft picks this season either. So for the Chiefs, when you look at this division with younger teams, I mean, obviously there's a lot of turmoil between the Chargers and the Raiders moving, although the Darth Vader Dome, I think, looks pretty cool, just from my opinion. I'll enjoy seeing games there. But I think it does raise a lot of questions about what the Chiefs can do to reload their roster in order to keep these teams that I think are getting better or have turned the corner to start getting better. They're all coming for them now.
Well, and I think too, from a Broncos perspective, I was looking at the Chiefs defense coming into 2019, and I felt as if, okay, there are some question marks. There's a lot of things that you got to look at in terms of, obviously they made a change, obviously going with Steve Spagnuolo as their defensive coordinator. I was a little concerned at first, just looking at it, said, okay, he likes to run a lot of cover 2, a lot of cover 4 style coverage. One of the things that I was looking at is the corner position. But as the season went on, what I observed watching film of Kansas City, despite the fact they had some young corners, some other guys coming in and stepping up into that role, Tyrann Mathieu was that vocal guy on that defense. And I think that he was the right type of person that they think they needed to bring in this offseason and obviously pay. And he obviously paid off big time and now winning a Super Bowl. What were your thoughts on Tyrann Mathieu and his impact for the Chiefs in 2019? Because I think it was one of the most underrated acquisitions so far of all the free agency moves last season for the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you could have written it better to see exactly how it was going to play out because, I mean, Tyrann Mathieu, he's a guy that I nearly wrote out of my draft because of all of his pre-draft nonsense, right? I mean, even getting his athletic training done before performing for the combine. I mean, there was some serious issues, right? And how far this guy has turned his career around is pretty impressive. But it's one thing to play in Houston last season and do well as an individual. Clearly, that's J.J. Watt's defense. It's not that you can take over that. But the fact that Spags, when he was hired, spoke with Veach, the two of them and Andy got together and come up with a plan. And he's a guy that they targeted specifically for being able to come in and become a leader. And he has done exactly that. I mean, and not just on the field or in the locker room. Yes, it took some time where he could start making the plays. He's got a rookie free safety backing him up. So that has an impact on that. But between the community, all the outreach, he has become in what, as one of the older guys on this defense, the elder statesman, he's a positive influence against everything that could go wrong for a younger group of defenders. He's a guy with obviously a lot of athletic talent. And now he's got the experience to make those plays that maybe 2 years ago he wasn't quite there on time because he didn't recognize, right? And now he's got the full package. And I think the Chiefs are going to get the best years of Tyrann Mathieu's career. And I expect him to be here for quite a while.
He's very smart. One thing I noticed, too, against the Broncos in that snow game, they used him to spy Drew Lock a little bit. I mean, this guy, they would blitz him. He would disguise coverage. I mean, he was a difference maker for them overall, I think, defensively, and obviously a big contributor in, obviously, Super Bowl 54. And the Chiefs' 2019 season, it played out the way that Chiefs fans had hoped for. Not from a Broncos side of things. You obviously, going in the division, anytime a division rival maybe wins the Super Bowl, you hate a little bit. There's a little bit of salt there. But as I've said before, and this is the thing, too, with some Chiefs fans that, got into a little bit of an altercation with me. Like, I have had nothing but high praise for what the Chiefs have done. And that doesn't make me a homer or, an apologist or anything like that. You got to recognize I'm a football guy. I recognize good teams and certainly things like that. So don't let that cloud your judgment. The Chiefs are a good football team. They got a lot of moves coming up ahead of them that I think are going to make a big difference. One of the things we're getting into here, we just talked about the recap of the 2019 season for the Chiefs. From a Broncos and Chiefs perspective, we're going to hear the opinions of Locked On Raiders and Locked On Chargers here in just a little bit when they jump in here with us. But, I think, Ryan, for you, looking at the Kansas City Chiefs, where they're at, what is the biggest question for them going into 2020? I know we talked a little bit about some contracts and free agency stuff, but from a team perspective, under the microscope, what is the biggest question that you have for KC going into the next season?
Well, barring the two that we already discussed, both the CBA and the Mahomes contract, the next big domino, because it limits what you can do otherwise, is Chris Jones. Can you get to a full-on extension? The way the Chiefs have generally structured contracts, it's pretty light the first 2 seasons on an extension, which allows you to have that cap room to do some of that reloading we talked about earlier. Can you get there? Do you have to end up using the franchise tag? Because that's going to severely limit your budget in free agency especially, but generally overall as well. That's the domino. If you can get that out of the way and get yourself clear, I think that allows you to do what a lot of teams really struggle with. I don't mean to limit how difficult it is to win a championship. It certainly is. But you ask the 72 Dolphins or anybody since then, going back is a whole different level of difficulty, because it's one thing to capture the magic, get it all going, but to maintain that after an off season and losing every year, every team is a little bit different. And I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for them.
Well, I think, too, I can relate from covering the Broncos. In 2015, after the Broncos won the Super Bowl, they did it with a very strong and dominant defense and a quarterback in Peyton Manning, who at the time in his career obviously was on the decline, but he was still able to manage a game. It gave everybody in Broncos country the sense that, hey, you know what, if we have a very strong defense, we can have an average guy or a guy that's okay that can manage a game at the quarterback position, and the Broncos can still win games and compete for another Super Bowl the next year. I mean, they went 9-7 in 2016 under Gary Kubiak and Trevor Siemian at the quarterback position. And then that's when the free fall started falling off a little bit. They decided to part ways with Wade Phillips. They brought in Vance Joseph. And then all of a sudden, these expectations, they had all the talent still in 2017. Aqib Talib, they had TJ Ward, they had Darian Stewart, they still had Chris Harris Jr. And there was a conversation that was had that, okay, this defense still can't do enough just to keep them in games. The offense has to put up points. We've seen that transition there. So I think from a Broncos perspective, one thing I'm really looking at in terms of the biggest question for KC is, how do they they manage that? If they do lose a couple guys, if they lose some offensive weapons, how are they going to be able to maybe make up for that? And there's also been some rumblings too. If the Chiefs are looking for a cornerback one, Chris Harris Jr. is going to test the free agency market, and there's going to be some AFC West teams that are going to be knocking on his door for some potential services. Now, can the Chiefs pay him what I think he wants? I don't think so, especially if they got to focus and prioritize some other moves. What are your thoughts on that?
Listen, as a proud Jayhawk, there's nothing I'd like more than Chris Harris in a Chiefs uniform. But you're right. He is too valuable, and he will demand and get too big a contract for the Chiefs to afford. I just don't think that it's in the cards. It'd be great to see, but I think really the overall thing, and not to correct you or anything, but Tyreek Hill is under contract through 2022. He is not an issue. If you have to use even the fifth-year option, if you really needed to on Mahomes, you could, knowing that it buys you more time. The management has come out and said that contract is likely 12 to 15 months away, so I'm not really concerned about that at that point. And I think it is smart of them to really look at what the CBA is going to bring. But I think it's the exact opposite of what you were talking about the Broncos' continued defensive push to guide them through subsequent seasons. I think this is so much based on the offense that because Hill's under contract, because Kelsey is there as well, yes, Sammy Watkins is likely going to be released. There's very few scenarios where I can see, unless it's a massive pay cut, that he's still on there. So that does knock down your offense a little bit. But McCole Hardman has a year under his belt at this point. He's not an X type. He's not going to be able to battle Richard Sherman physically and come away with a catch like that we saw in the Super Bowl. But there are other guys waiting in the wings. Pringle, one guy from K-State. And I think, honestly, the thing that I go back to is how the history in the AFC West is so much about teams jumping ship to each other. I mean, I think the Broncos are probably in the second best position in terms of quarterback for the future right now. And that's another guy that comes from Chiefs Kingdom, played at Missouri. And I think that helps them and shows a little bit of balance that this is going to be for all these teams, but the Chiefs included, for the foreseeable future about the quarterback, and everything else will take secondary priority. And if you can get those bit pieces, or it does put a lot more emphasis on the draft. You can make up for not being able to play in free agency by nailing your draft choices. And I think that's the good thing about Spag's system is, like you said, he used to play a lot more cover 2, cover 4. That's kind of was a go-to, right? This season, the tendencies trended towards man as the majority, not by a ton, but 56 to 58%, really two halves of the season, to tell you the truth. And that opens up the door about what type of CB1 you can go try to get. You can play mixed coverages. If you have to end up with a zone guy, and that's what's there at 32, then that's the way it falls.
I think it's going to be really intriguing to see what they decide to do NFL draft. And here's the thing too, Ryan, you know this as well as anybody else. The free agency period is really going to set the table for what teams decide to do. Guys can become open options in free agency. They may take care of a need there. And then you might have the opportunity, even if the Chiefs are picking at 32, to take the best player available at that given situation without having to maybe reach for a position that you may need. That's where a lot of teams' focus really is. And, one thing I want to get to as well, I want to talk to you about this in terms of looking ahead to 2020. How do you think that the Chiefs may do? Because look, we're getting into the whole standpoint where we're taking a look all across the board at some of the other divisions this team's going to be playing. I think the schedule becomes a little bit easier for the AFC West in comparison to what it was last season, where they were taking on the NFC North and various other teams. I mean, that was a tough schedule all across the board for the Chargers, for the Broncos, for the Chiefs, and the Raiders. And obviously some of these teams responded to, some didn't. What are your early kind of hindsights? I know you may not like to get into predictions. I know I'm not the type that likes to predict things, but if you could foresee this Chiefs team in 2020, how do you think they stack up?
Well, I really do feel that, like most teams that just come off of a championship, you have to give them the odds-on favorite, right? I believe Vegas is as well. Not that I put a whole lot into Vegas, but when you look at who they're going to be playing, the AFC East, okay, I have to say at this point, especially with the Hulu commercials and everything, I think I'm more scared or concerned about playing the Bills and what they have to reload on defense in order to stop the running attack there. Big fan of Singletary myself, so I do recognize the talent that they have there. And you never know, Allen might actually put it all together. I think athletically and arm talent-wise, I think he's probably right behind Mahomes in terms of the younger echelon of teams, leading by young quarterbacks anyway. Beyond that, I'm not too concerned with the South. I think we've seen through the course of this season, but beating both Tennessee and Houston, and the Chiefs are going to be all right there. There is a little bit of concern. The one aspect is Chris Jones is going to be on this roster. Is he going to be happy? We don't know. That franchise tag often irritates players, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But they'll still have that pass rush. It's not like they're losing that. They do need to add some on the other side. I doubt that Suggs is in a position to not retire. I do feel that's the way that he's leaning. I haven't spoken to him, but that's my guess. So you have injuries at Okafor and Ogba, the other two defensive ends that could really fill in that space. And you have a young guy in Tano Passanio, who I think did make strides this year, but by no means is a force across the league. So you have to reload some pass rush on the edge opposite Frank Clark. We do want to upgrade. Right. Yeah. It's a big question, right? And there's a lot of options out there. But I also feel like, although I want a CB1, and I do feel that the Chiefs want to upgrade that position, we saw what they were able to do with Travarius Ward as their best corner this season. So it is the problem is that there's no volume at the cornerback position on the Chiefs roster. It's Fenton, Rashad Fenton, just a rookie here who did come up with some pretty good plays this season, and Ward. That's all they have under contract. So there's a volume issue to replace there. Whether it has to be a CB1 in their eyes in order to make another playoff push like this, I'm not so sure. So for me, it comes down to, I'm not going to say they could go undefeated, but I don't see right now a contender in the AFC West that can take the division from them. And beyond that, I see maybe only one or two teams that are within striking distance in the AFC. And if we go a step beyond, I don't see why there's anything to say you can't throw caution to the wind and expect them to either get to an AFC championship or return to the Super Bowl.
That's going to be a tough task. I mean, the Chiefs are the team to beat. For the Broncos, I mean, they got to approach the season as we want to compete in the division. We want to try to take the division. They got that game against KC circled on their schedule whenever the official schedule is announced. But outside of that, from an AFC West perspective, I think every team, Broncos, Chargers, Raiders, you got to find a way. How do you stop Kansas City? How do you compete within the division? I think for the Chargers, they're going to float a little bit down to the bottom. We're going to hear from Daniel Wade, Locked On Chargers host, here in a little while. You guys are going to hear him all throughout the week here. Locked On Broncos, Locked On Chiefs, Locked On Raiders, Locked On Chargers, our ultimate AFC West division crossover. Ryan, kind of some final thoughts here in terms from a Chiefs perspective. Anything you want to fire off here on our Monday episode of this crossover?
I think the big thing for me is that for the Chiefs to hold serve, it's about adapting to how the rest of the division is going to try to combat them. I think it's interesting that from a lot of analysts' perspective, it's about outscoring them or trying to keep up with them scoring. So my question is, do the other teams in the AFC West put resources, draft resources, free agent resources, money into their offenses? Or do they try to get better coverage? Do they try to get speed demons that can run with Tyreek Hill? There's maybe one or two of them out there. There's not many. And quite frankly, I think the guys that are going to be off the scale in the draft, and us over at Rogue Analytics, that's what we measure as athletic matrix, is how you can do functionally on the football field. There's maybe one or two guys in this draft that could maybe give him a run speed-wise, but they don't have the experience. They don't have the ball skills. There's a lot of questions there. So do you think that that's the way that most of this division goes, is just trying to bolster offense to try to keep up? Or did they really try to take something from them?
That's a tough question. I think Vic Fangio, Broncos head coach, had laid this out a little bit. He had mentioned in some of the losses that Kansas City had, the other team was able to score over 31 plus points, maybe in 7 of the 8 matchups. And then, against the Colts, for example, they scored 19 points, but they ran the ball 45 times, controlled the time of possession, obviously got some defensive stops. So I think that, a lot of teams, if you try to go all in on maybe a corner that has a lot of speed that maybe can cover Tyreek Hill, well, how are you going to cover Travis Kelce? How are you going to cover McCole Hardman? How are you going to, be able to cover some of these other guys? That is where the thing comes back to bite you in the tail, because Andy Reid and just football in general, for any coach, any offensive mind, we know that, okay, if you take away one option, we're going to look at getting this other option involved. You can't significantly put in a game plan, in my opinion. I think it's very difficult to match up if you got 11 guys to be able to solidify and stop some of those other matchup options, whether it's 4 wide receiver sets or if it's a 3 wide receiver set and a tight end. I mean, you have to find a way to limit and slow down some of those big plays. Can you completely do it? As of right now, I don't think there's been a formula that's been created for Kansas City.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think it's going to be a really interesting evolution, and I think the byproduct of it will be, like you said, the Broncos finished in second, tied at 7 wins, right? I expect a step forward from them. I expect a step forward from the Raiders. So you're talking about possibly, I could see another season where there's 3 teams from the AFC West that make the playoffs next season. And so that arms race, so to call it, in the AFC West has a bigger effect on the rest of the AFC and the league in general, right? Because everybody's trying to get to that point where they can compete within this division.
I know we've had this conversation so many times. I mean, on paper, sometimes coming into a season, the AFC West could seem like one of the most competitive divisions in football. And there's been times where it has been. There's times where it's been one of the least competitive divisions all across the board from 3 other teams in comparison to 1 or 2. But yeah, I can definitely see that being a potential scenario. I mean, the hype is real right now. The Broncos have an experienced coaching staff that they've put together. They got rid of some of the youth, new offensive coordinator, Pat Shurmur. So things are going to be a little interesting for the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Chargers, and the Raiders as we go through our entire AFC West division crossover here this week on the Locked On NFL Network. And Ryan, thank you so much, man, for giving us the Chiefs perspective on the Chiefs Day. Obviously, for them being Super Bowl champions, we all talked about them first. And tomorrow on Locked On AFC West crossover, whatever we're getting into here, it's going to be a Broncos focus centric from Chiefs questions, Chargers questions, and Raiders questions. We're going to be analyzing the division as well. And then so on and so forth. We got the Raiders and then the Chargers. And then a Valentine's Day showdown, which players that we love the most. And we dive a little bit deeper into the AFC West going forward. All on the Locked On NFL Network. I'm Cody York, host of Locked On Broncos. Ryan Tracy of Locked On Chiefs has given us a lot of information, ladies and gentlemen. So if you're a Locked On Broncos fan, Chiefs fan, Chargers fan, Raiders fan, you're getting some good information. And as always, we appreciate you guys over here on the Locked On NFL Network.
That's it for today's portion of the Ultimate AFC West crossover. We'll have tons more for you tomorrow, going over every team in this division with a wrap-up on Friday that will culminate in all of it coming together. Thanks for listening today. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Ryan Tracy is the founder of Rogue Analytics and the host of RGR Football on YouTube. Follow him there. Chris Clark is a senior analyst at ChiefsDigest.com, where you can get his work. Rate and review at Apple Podcasts and subscribe on your preferred podcast